The story begins in a quiet kitchen with a pot boiling on the stove. Suddenly, the peaceful mood is shattered by an emergency broadcast from the television. On the screen, an anchor repeats the alert, showing just how serious the situation is. Then he announces that a mysterious labyrinth has been confirmed in the Shibuya district. With that, all nearby residents are ordered to evacuate the area immediately. The strange floating object glows intensely as the labyrinth alert continues. At this moment, soldiers are already on the street, helping people get out of the area safely. In the midst of the chaos, a frightened little girl gets swept away by the desperate, fleeing crowd. People look up, terrified by the presence of that giant thing in the sky. The scene is set in Japan, and the army arrives with tanks to deal with the threat. Suddenly, the portal begins to open, releasing a massive amount of energy, and from inside, a bizarre creature starts to emerge, sending everyone into a panic. The creature emerges with such force that the ground shatters from the impact of its arrival. Finally, the monster comes out completely, revealing its giant, purple insect-like form. The military quickly identifies it as an enemy and prepares for combat. The creature stares down the humans with its glowing eyes, ready to cause destruction. Without hesitation, the commander orders all vehicles to prepare to fire, but a soldier warns his captain that civilians haven't finished evacuating the area yet. The captain knows the risk, but understands the damage will be far worse if they don't stop the monster right then and there. So, all the tanks aim their cannons in the direction of the enormous purple creature, and with the fire command given, a gigantic explosion lights up the entire city. Several tanks fire at the same time in a coordinated attack against the invader. The monster is engulfed in the flames and explosions from the shells fired by the tanks. After the attack, a cloud of smoke covers the entire street as helicopters fly overhead. But to everyone's surprise, the creature is still standing in the middle of the smoke. A soldier reports that the target is still active and without a single scratch on its body. The captain is shocked, as it was a direct hit from a 120mm armor-piercing shell. The monster then glares at its attackers, and its eyes begin to glow with a purple light. A huge amount of energy gathers in its mouth, preparing to fire, and in an instant, a devastating energy beam is fired toward the soldiers. The energy beam scores a direct hit on the tanks, which are completely obliterated. Inside one of the vehicles, a soldier watches the light approach with pure terror on his face. Then, all the tanks are sent flying by the absurd force of the monster's attack. A giant explosion follows, wiping out everything in its path. With that, civilians panic and run desperately away from the destruction. It's explained that these mysterious structures that appeared in the world are called labyrinths, and the monsters that come out of them have been named enemies by humanity. These creatures couldn't be destroyed by existing weapons, leaving a trail of destruction. Because of this, humanity was devastated, with no chance to fight back. Suddenly, several smaller, flying monsters appear and start attacking the civilians. One of these winged beings attacks a man in the middle of the crowd without any mercy. At that moment, the little girl from before trips and falls to the ground amid the chaos, and one of the flying creatures approaches her, ready to attack the defenseless child. The monster raises its sharp claws to deliver the final blow to the little girl, but before it could do anything, a red flash suddenly cuts through the air. In the blink of an eye, the monster is sliced in two by a swift and precise cut. The girl curls up on the ground, protecting herself as the creature is defeated in front of her. And then, a mysterious man appears with a glowing sword to save her. The girl looks up, surprised and relieved to see that someone has come to her rescue. It's revealed that inside the labyrinths, unknown weapons were discovered, and these weapons were the only thing capable of defeating the terrible enemies. The savior turns, and we see that he has very striking red hair and eyes. He then asks the little girl, she's still in one piece after all the commotion. The girl gets scared and notices the red eyes of the young man who saved her. The hero is a bit confused by her reaction and looks to the side, not understanding. Suddenly, a piece of a building starts to fall toward them. The girl looks up again, terrified by the new threat approaching. The young man then asks if his left eye is bothering her in any way. With tears in her eyes, The girl is in shock and can't answer the question. In the background, more monsters appear, ready to attack the city and cause more destruction. He then tells the girl that his eye is just a little special and different. Meanwhile, the giant monster fires another energy beam in their direction. The powerful attack hits the ground and creates a gigantic crater, kicking up a lot of dust. At that moment, a car that was thrown by the explosion is falling to crush them. But the young man repeats that his eye is special, and its power activates with an intense glow. It's then explained that these weapons surpass technology, and the strongest is the Regulus arm. With that, a large golden magic circle forms in the air, indicating the use of the ability. The little girl curls up on the ground, frightened by everything happening around her. But she opens her eyes a little to see what her savior is doing to protect her. And as she looks up, the girl is completely shocked by what she's seeing. The car and the monster's energy beam are completely frozen in time. It's revealed that this ability works on everything within his field of vision. He can stop the time of any object, which is why his eye is considered divine. The name of this power is the Eye of Chronostasis, and he won't let the monster win. The little girl is speechless as she understands the red-haired young man's incredible ability. But the hero reveals that there is a price to pay every time he uses this power. His vision shows an interface with a life counter at 27 years, and as soon as he activates the power, his lifespan begins to decrease rapidly. He explains that using the Eye of Chronostasis consumes his own life expectancy. In just a few seconds, his life counter already shows he's lost a whole year. Even so, he says that it doesn't matter and draws a gun to face the enemy. We discover that to use the weapons, one must offer their lifespan as payment. To use the pistol, he spends 30 days of his remaining lifespan. Then, the interface shows that the gun's cartridge has begun to recharge with energy. A loading bar appears in his vision, and it fills up quickly. The young man's eye glows intensely as he concentrates on his next move. He points the gun to the sky, and it begins to shine with a powerful golden light. With the cartridge loaded, the interface announces that dual chronostasis has been activated. The pistol becomes enveloped in a red energy, ready to be fired. With the particles charged and focused, he prepares to launch the final attack. The interface announces that the weapon is finally ready to fire. With that, the crosshairs lock onto the giant monster's energy attack. The young man then says with a smile that he's going to put an end to this creature. Without hesitating for a second, he pulls the trigger with all his might, and a powerful red energy beam is fired from his pistol. His shot scores a direct hit on the attack the monster had launched earlier. At that moment, the two energy attacks collide in an explosion of light. The hero's shot is stronger and continues to advance toward the creature. The attack hits the monster head-on, causing a huge impact. With that, a gigantic red explosion occurs and engulfs the creature. The monster's body begins to completely fall apart because of the attack. Little by little, the creature is disintegrated by the intense red light, until finally, there's nothing left of the enemy that was attacking the city. The young man stands there as the monster's remains vanish into the air. With the threat eliminated, time returns to normal, and the car crashes to the ground. He then thinks that he needs to at least earn back the lifespan he spent. Shortly after, the interface confirms that the enemy has been completely destroyed, and a new message appears saying he has received a life count. It's explained that by defeating enemies, it's possible to gain a new lifespan, and his life counter suddenly jumps up to 33 years in total. The little girl watches all of this, trembling with fear and not understanding a thing. Noticing her state, the young man turns to speak with the small survivor. He gives a gentle smile to try and calm the girl down after the big scare, but suddenly, a shadow flies quickly over the two of them. It was another flying monster, which arrives by attacking one of its companions. The young man picks up the girl and observes the other enemies that are still nearby. At that moment, a blue-haired girl lands right in front of them. The newcomer announces that they've finished their work on their side as well. She says they're ready to go, and he comments that it's good to have reliable allies. The little girl watches their interaction, still scared but a little calmer. The red-haired young man then approaches the little girl he saved. He kneels down and says that she's safe and that his team will find her family. The little girl tearfully thanks him for saving her life from that monster. Then, out of curiosity, she asks for the name of her red-haired hero. He replies that his name is Mogami Tendo and that he's a type of soldier called a raider. After that, the group prepares for the next mission, and he calls them to conquer the labyrinth. We see Tendo's determined face, ready to take on any challenge that comes his way. It's explained that raiders are humanity's last guardians who fight against the enemies. The girl watches in awe those who saved her and protect the world, and this is the story of how a boy who was a nobody became the strongest raider. With that, Tendo and his team walk toward the entrance of the dangerous portal. The scene changes to a night in Shinjuku, where some bullies are surrounding someone. The victim is thrown hard onto the ground, his belongings scattering across the street. The leader of the bullies complains that hitting the kid is worse than wailing on a punching bag. We find out the boy getting beat up is Tendo, a 16-year-old student who curses his bad luck. He's really annoyed to be bothered by a bunch of losers. One of the bullies gets a little scared and suggests that maybe they should stop. The leader asks why he's afraid, and the other says that his younger brother is. The other bullies also get nervous as they remember who the boy's relative is. Suddenly, the mysterious shadow of a man in a white coat appears in the alley. The white-haired man with an eye patch stares down the bullies with a very cold look. The bullies recognize him as the younger brother and genius of the Mogami brothers. He is Mogami Reiji, the national raider, and he tells the bullies to get out of his way. Completely terrified, the bullies think that Reiji is going to finish them right there, but the group's leader refuses to leave and faces the newcomer with a defiant look. However, Reiji simply ignores the bully and continues walking down the dark alley. He walks toward his older brother, who is still on the ground. Tendo looks up and recognizes his younger brother with surprise and shame. Without showing any emotion, Reiji just looks at his brother and calls him pathetic. He then criticizes Tendo for not having the courage to fight back, even when he's getting beaten up. The bullies laugh and say the rumors are true, and Reiji really hates his brother. On the ground, Tendo laments how pathetic it is to be abandoned like that by his own brother. The bullies notice the girl with Reiji, and the redhead thinks that even she is on another level. The raider duo then turns and starts to walk away from the dark alley. Reiji's companion looks at him with a confident smile on her face. Tendo watches the girl from a distance and wonders who she could be. The bullies continue to taunt him about the huge difference between the twin brothers. The red-haired young man then wonders when his relationship with his brother became like this. A flashback begins, showing that everything changed because of that fateful day. He remembers that when they were kids, he thought they could do anything together. Back then, young Tendo was full of courage and wasn't afraid of anything at all. But all that confidence he felt had no real basis. And all of that was destroyed 5 years ago, when a labyrinth appeared in front of him. The young boy looks up, completely terrified by the situation. Suddenly, the ground begins to open up, and cracks swallow his entire family. He screams in pure terror as he sees his parents and brother being pulled into the darkness. All of them fall into a bottomless pit that appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the park. The labyrinth that suddenly appeared swallowed them, all without a trace. And in the end, his entire family was taken inside that mysterious portal. That was the day of the first major incident involving a labyrinth in the city. The scene then cuts to the front of a large hospital at night. Inside, Tendo is sitting alone on a bench, covered by a blanket. Then the sad news is revealed, as the only person who came back alive was Reiji. On television, a reporter shows Reiji's rescue, and Tendo thinks that he couldn't do anything. But he corrects himself and realizes the harsh truth about what really happened. In reality, he didn't do anything because he just trembled in fear and cried desperately. And he didn't even reach out a hand to his younger brother, who was asking for help. With that, the boy lowers his head, filled with guilt and remorse for his failure. That terrible incident completely separated the two brothers' paths, and Reiji became the most famous raider in Japan, and the youngest to ever clear a labyrinth. Meanwhile, Tendo feels like a failure who can never get anywhere. He hears other people calling him the genius's bug and feels completely useless. The red-haired young man lowers his head, sad about his own situation. He doesn't know who started that nickname, but he admits they hit the nail on the head. The only stain on the reputation of the genius Mogami Reiji was his useless twin brother, and that brother was him, Mogami Tendo, the family failure. Back in the alley, the bullies continue to beat up Tendo relentlessly. He's on his knees on the ground as the bullies surround him to continue the beating. The redhead believes that Reiji still hates him for not saving him in the past. But even so, he feels powerless and doesn't know what he could possibly do. He thinks that he can't even stand up to scum like these bullies. Suddenly, the bullies notice something strange behind the red-haired boy on the ground. Tendo looks up and sees a purple light reflected in his eyes. Confused, he wonders what's happening at that moment, and to his astonishment, a large labyrinth appears right in the middle of the dark alley. Tendo and the bullies are thrown back by the portal's energy. He looks up and confirms that it really is a labyrinth. A drop of purple energy falls from the portal and begins to spread across the ground. The dark energy advances quickly toward Tendo like a shadow. He tries to run, but the shadow catches up to him and begins to completely envelop him. The boy is pulled in by the mysterious energy with no chance of escape. The shadow consumes him whole, leaving only an empty space behind. Suddenly, he finds himself floating in a digital space with several messages appearing. The messages confirm that he is a non-user and his bodily functions are recovering. Then, a new Conqueror registration is successfully completed in the system. A screen appears in front of him with a welcome message to the labyrinth. After that, a blue portal opens and sucks him into an unknown place. Tendo wakes up in a strange place with stone walls and giant pillars. He groans in pain as he tries to get up and figure out where he is. Around him, he only sees a dark hallway and a bright light on the ceiling. He looks around, confused, not knowing where he ended up. The boy gets up and sees that he's in a huge hall with many people. Tendo asks himself where he is and realizes that the others are also waking up. He concludes that he must be inside a real labyrinth. Suddenly, his left eye begins to glow with an intense blue light. Tendo rubs his eyes, not understanding what's happening to him. But when he opens them again, the blue light is still shining in his pupil. His vision now shows an interface with a lifespan counter. The counter shows that he has 69 years of life remaining. Completely shocked, Tendo can't believe what he's seeing. The bullies also wake up and start seeing the same strange numbers. He realizes that the bullies were also swallowed by the labyrinth. Tendo becomes even more confused by the situation and what he's seeing in his vision. Then he notices that one of the bullies' life counters is at 83 years. The red-haired boy says he doesn't understand anything that's happening anymore. One of the bullies points to something at the end of the hall and asks what it is. Tendo turns and sees two stone pedestals with something on top of them. He's surprised to see what's on the stone pedestals. In disbelief, he gets closer to get a better look at what it is. And to his surprise, on top of each pedestal, there's a sword stuck in it. He wonders if that's a real sword in the middle of the hall. Tendo thinks that if this place is a labyrinth, then that must be a weapon. He reaches out his hand to grab one of the swords, ready to defend himself. The leader of the bullies interrupts him and says that's one of those weapons. He's heard that they're incredible and wants to grab one for himself. The bully shoves Tendo and calls him a bug to get to the sword first. With a wicked smile, the bully says he's going to take the weapon from his hands. But suddenly, he stops and asks Tendo what he just said. Tendo also grabs a sword and asks why the bully is talking to himself. And with that, the two face off with swords in hand, ready for a confrontation. Suddenly, a mysterious voice speaks directly in Tendo's head. The voice says that to obtain the weapon, it's necessary to spend 30 years of life. Tendo is shocked to hear that he needs to pay with 30 years of his life. The bully ignores him and charges forward to attack the boy with the sword in hand. Tendo's vision focuses on the bully, and his life counter appears. And to his surprise, the bully's lifespan drops from 83 to 53 years. Tendo realizes that those numbers really do show people's lifespans. He concludes that the bully lost 30 years of his life by picking up the sword. But the bully doesn't care and celebrates that with the weapon, he'll be the strongest. He brags that he'll be even stronger than the famous Mogami Reiji. Suddenly, a white monster with sharp claws appears and attacks the bully from behind. The bully's friend looks on in shock as his companion is attacked. The monster sinks its claws into the bully's head, who has no time to react. In an instant, the creature defeats him, and he falls to the ground, lifeless. Tendo's eyes widen as he sees the monsters that have appeared in the hall. Several white creatures with pink eyes appear and surround the humans. Tendo screams in fear, recognizing those creatures as the fearsome enemies. One of the monsters approaches him, ready to attack the defenseless boy. Tendo is paralyzed with fear as the creature prepares for its attack. The monster that took down the bully turns to dust and disappears completely. Tendo notices that the bully turned into sand after being defeated, and his vision shows the bully's life counter completely zeroed out. With that, Tendo understands that the numbers really do show their lifespan. One of the creatures attacks the other bullies who were in the hall. The monsters continue their relentless assault against the defenseless humans. Tendo looks at his sword and notices that the monsters are dirty. The white creatures are covered in red marks and scratches. He realizes the situation is very bad and that they are in great danger. Tendo looks at his sword and wonders what he should do now. With his heart racing, he grips the weapon tightly, ready to fight. Without a second thought, Tendo also spends 30 years of his life to take the sword. With that, his life counter suddenly drops to just 39 years. He screams in despair and runs away from the monsters to try and survive. Tendo complains that he took the sword on pure impulse and wishes there was a confirmation screen. He reaches the end of the hallway and realizes he's at a dead end. The boy turns around and sees one of the white monsters running toward him. The creature stares at him with its glowing pink eyes, ready for the attack. Tendo thinks that if the sword is a weapon, it must be able to defeat the enemy, but he doubts his own ability and wonders if he can really do it. With a heart full of fear and anger, he grips the sword's hilt tightly. Tendo charges forward with a war cry and swings the sword at the monster, but the creature is faster and easily dodges his attack. The red-haired boy is shocked by the enemy's speed. The monster leaps over him and prepares for a quick counterattack. The creature lands a direct hit on his back with its sharp claws. Tendo screams in pain as he feels the monster's claws tearing at him. He falls to the ground, bleeding and with no strength left to fight. The enemy's blow left a serious wound on his back. Tendo glares at the monster with hatred and frustration in his eyes. The creature slowly approaches to deliver the final blow to the injured boy. He wonders if this is all he can do and feels like a failure. With tears in his eyes, Tendo laments that in the end, he always gives up on everything. He feels like he's giving up again, just like he did in the past. But suddenly, Reiji appears and slices the creature in half with his sword of light. The younger brother stares at Tendo with a cold, serious look. Tendo looks at his savior, surprised and in disbelief at what he's seeing. Reiji calls him generous for giving up his life like that. He says it's pathetic to give up your life with a sword still in your hand. Tendo is speechless and can only manage to call out his brother's name. Lying on the ground, he grips the hilt of his sword with force and frustration. Reiji says that if Tendo has no will to live, then he can just go perish in a ditch somewhere. Tendo remains silent, just staring at his younger brother with a pained look. The white-haired brother then says that if he wants to survive, even in the face of certain doom, he should get behind him and trust in his skills to protect him. Reiji's sword glows with a blue light, and he promises he will get him home. Tendo is shocked by his brother's words and doesn't understand his attitude. He asks why Reiji would go so far to save him, even though he hates him so much. Meanwhile, one of the bullies screams in terror as he sees the monsters approaching. The bully begs the creatures not to come any closer to him and his friend. Tendo looks back and sees his brother facing the monsters with a determined look. Reiji says his personal feelings don't matter because he risks his life for others. He charges toward the monsters, ready to fulfill his duty as a raider, and with a confident smile, Reiji states that this is what it means to be a national raider. Tendo watches the scene with admiration and respect for his brother's courage. That image of his brother fighting the monsters was burned into his memory. He forgot the pain and fear and just etched that image into his mind's eye. Reiji charges forward and cuts down the monsters with his light sword in a deadly dance. The vivid image of the battle and his brother's back, like a hero's. The trail of the battle and the image of Reiji fighting bravely to protect them. To Tendo, his brother was a true hero in that moment. He compares him to the moon, which outshone the sun with its brilliance and power. Tendo looks at his brother with a mix of admiration and envy in his heart. Reiji turns and looks at his older brother with a look of superiority. The story of the labyrinths began 38 years ago in Berlin, Germany. After that, countless labyrinths began to appear all over the world. They appeared in places like New York and even Rio de Janeiro. Many research institutions studied the labyrinths to understand their origin, but they only managed to learn 3 things about these mysterious portals. The first is that the only way out is at the end of the labyrinth, at its deepest point. And the second is that the enemies born inside will eventually come out into the world. The third thing is that the only weapons that can take down the enemies exist only inside, and those who dive into these unknown labyrinths are called raiders. Reiji leads the group of survivors through the dark corridor of the labyrinth. Tendo thinks that this is all he knows about the dangerous labyrinths, but his brother says he's almost right, but there's more to know. Reiji explains that raider isn't a job title but something more. Tendo is confused by the explanation and doesn't understand what he means. The white-haired brother says that raiders are different from normal humans. Reiji asks if Tendo has also noticed the strange change in his body. The red-haired boy thinks for a moment and realizes he's right. He remembers the strange voice he heard before arriving in that place. And he also remembers the interface that appeared in his vision. Tendo looks at his hand and sees the life counter, which now reads 37 years. Reiji looks at him with a disdainful glance and realizes he still doesn't get it. Tendo is surprised and asks why his life counter decreased again. Reiji explains that the number shows his lifespan and that he's already figured that out. When a raider takes damage, their wounds are automatically healed by consuming life. Tendo then looks at his leg, which was injured by the monster earlier. He remembers the creature's attack and how its claws tore his skin. And to his surprise, the wound on his leg is already completely healed. Tendo is impressed by the raider's ability to heal quickly, but Reiji warns him that if he loses all of his life, he's done for. Tendo looks at his brother with a serious expression, understanding the gravity of the situation. Reiji says that once someone becomes a raider, they must forget about a normal end. The redhead remembers the bully who was defeated and turned into sand. The more serious the injury, the more lifespan is burned to heal it. Reiji glances at a monster hiding behind a pillar and prepares to attack. He brandishes his sword and gets into position to face the new threat. Several white monsters appear in the hallway, ready to attack the group. Tendo shouts desperately, warning his brother about the enemies that have appeared. But the white-haired young man leaps, and with a single sword strike, he cuts down all the monsters in mid-air. Tendo is speechless and can only manage to stammer his younger brother's name. Reiji moves with incredible speed, defeating all the creatures with his glowing blade. The red-haired boy is completely shocked and doesn't understand what just happened. With the sword in his hand, he realizes his brother defeated all the enemies in a single instant. The white-haired raider then calmly sheathes his sword after the battle. He explains that to take down an enemy, you have to destroy their core to gain lifespan. Tendo then wonders what this core his brother mentioned could be. He looks at the ground and sees a red crystal in the middle of the monster's remains. The redhead lets out an awkward laugh and thinks he could never hit a target that small. Suddenly, his eyes go wide as he notices something strange in his vision. With that, the interface in his eye focuses on Reiji and shows a lifespan of 189 years. A new monster emerges from the shadows and charges quickly to attack the two brothers. But the creature suddenly stops and falls to the ground in pieces before reaching them. Then, The sound of footsteps gets everyone's attention as a boot steps firmly on the ground. A blue-haired girl appears and reveals herself as Officer Yui Mizusaki, Captain Mogami. The younger brother recognizes her and says he's glad to see her safe and sound. Rigi asks for the status, and she says all the civilians she found are here, but she regrets that many people had already been defeated before she could help them. Suddenly, Tendo shouts and points toward the newcomer with a look of surprise. He says he recognizes her because he saw her meeting with Rigi in the alley earlier. Without a second thought, the redhead asks if she's his brother's girlfriend. The white-haired young man questions what he means by that, and Tendo plays it off. The pair gets annoyed, and Rigi calls her his subordinate, while she says she has the right to choose. Yu then looks at the red-haired boy with suspicion and asks who he is. With that, Rigi reluctantly replies that the boy is his older brother. Tendo holds out his hand with a forced smile and asks if it's a pleasure to meet her. The blue-haired girl glares at him with disgust and asks if that fake smile is on purpose. The young man's smile becomes even more crooked, and he starts to sweat, seeing her reaction. He trembles and concludes that she is Rigi's subordinate, who asks about the enemies she saw. The white-haired brother finds it strange that there are so few enemies there and feels that something bad is about to happen. With that, he orders Mizusaki to take the civilians to the labyrinth exit while he investigates. The white-haired young man says he's going to check another passage, and Yu tells everyone to follow her. Tendo gets worried and calls out his younger brother's name as he walks away, but Reiji completely ignores him and continues walking into the darkness of the corridor. The redhead then realizes he didn't even thank him for being saved once again. Meanwhile, Yui points to a glowing portal and announces that it's the exit to the outside world. She asks everyone to remain calm and leave in an orderly fashion as Tendo watches the line. The blue-haired girl looks at the situation with a serious and focused expression. Then she turns to Tendo and scolds him for just standing there doing nothing in the middle of the path. Suddenly, a giant, dark rift appears in the air right above the labyrinth's exit. The officer is completely shocked to see the new threat that appeared out of nowhere. Yu then turns and faces the mysterious rift with a determined look on her face. From within the rift, a gigantic black sword begins to emerge slowly. The blue-haired girl is startled by the size and appearance of that bizarre weapon. Without hesitation, she leaps and attacks the giant sword with a powerful downward strike. The impact of the blow is so strong that the officer is pushed back by the weapon's force. She grits her teeth and wonders what kind of absurd power is pressing down on her. Then, a shadowy figure holding the sword is revealed in the darkness of the rift. The creature has the appearance of a black knight, and its image seems to be glitching. The monster's armor is covered in rings and has a purple glow on its helmet. The knight then swings its sword and easily flings the blue-haired girl away. Tendo watches the scene, terrified by the power of that new and terrible creature. Yui is thrown with such force that she creates a gigantic crater in the hall's floor. The explosion kicks up a lot of dust and pieces of rock everywhere. The red-haired boy is completely stunned and wonders what just happened there. Amidst the rubble, we see that the officer has been completely defeated by the Black Knight. He remembers that while everyone was heading for the exit, the creature suddenly appeared. Suddenly, a red flash fills his vision as something hits him in the face. And to his horror, he realizes the Black Knight attacked him in the blink of an eye. With a hand on his face, Tendo realizes he's covered in his own red liquid, and the system interface announces that he suffered a cut on his face and left eye. The red-haired boy screams in pain as he faces the Black Knight that attacked him. He panics when he sees that his remaining lifespan is 37 years. Then the interface announces that the repair has begun, and his counter drops to 35 years. The Black Knight stares at him with its glowing purple eyes, ready to attack again. The shadowy creature prepares to deliver the final blow to the defenseless boy on the ground. With its giant sword in hand, the monster charges to end the boy's life. The knight swings its weapon with all its might toward Tendo on the ground, but before it could hit him, Rigi appears and blocks the attack with his own sword. Tendo is completely shocked to see his younger brother saving him again. The white white-haired young man struggles to hold back the Black Knight's powerful blow. The two swords clash in a violent impact that shakes the entire hall. With that, Reiji's blade begins to shatter from the enemy's absurd strength. The knight hits Reiji's arm with a powerful and impactful blow. The creature continues to press on with its sword and breaks the raider's defense. With that, the white-haired young man's left arm is sent flying. He is shocked to see that his powerful claymore sword has been broken in half. He wonders what kind of enemy this is, as he's never seen a humanoid one before. The white-haired young man starts to sweat, realizing the danger of the situation. In the background, he sees the pile of civilians who were defeated by the Black Knight. He looks at his injured arm with a look of pure frustration and anger. The raider remembers his fallen subordinate and admits it was an error in judgment. He laments that he didn't want to spend his precious lifespan in a place like this. Then, the white-haired young man decides to remove his eye patch to fight seriously. Without the eye patch, his power activates, and a green aura envelopes his sword and his body. Tendo screams in desperation, warning that his brother's arm is still injured. But Reiji says that losing one or two arms is nothing for a conqueror. The red-haired boy gets even more worried, because he knows the healing isn't free, and the interface confirms that to heal himself, Reiji is spending a lot of his lifespan. The raider's life counter plummets from 189 to 150, 6 years. Tendo is astonished that his brother still wants to fight, and the young man says that time is precious. With his eye glowing red, the younger brother says he'll end the fight in an instant. His special ability, called the Eye of Chronostasis, is finally activated for combat. A magic circle glows intensely in his red eye, showing that the power is ready. Tendo desperately screams to his brother about the arm he lost in the fight. Then he sees his relative's life counter-plummeting and panics at the amount. The raider's life drops from 189 to 156 years in seconds. But the white-haired boy says he can't waste time and will end it all in an instant. With that, he charges toward the Black Knight to protect his fallen older brother. And the system interface confirms that the Eye of Chronostasis has been successfully activated. The Black Knight prepares to strike with its giant sword and a golden aura. The genius charges at high speed, while the monster leaps for a direct confrontation. Reiji's red eye glows intensely, showing that his ability is at its maximum. With incredible agility, the raider slides under the knight for a surprise attack. He then strikes the monster with a swift and precise blow, aiming for its weak spot. But to his surprise, the attack doesn't cause the damage he expected on the creature. The hero lands on the ground and realizes the Black Knight barely felt his blow. The creature turns to him without a single scratch on its tough armor. The monster's eye glows with a pink light as it coldly stares down its opponent. Reiji then admits the enemy is tough and he couldn't destroy the core in one hit. He realizes this creature is on a completely different level from the other enemies. The Black Knight turns and faces the raider with a very menacing posture. Suddenly, the monster uses a type of energy whip to attack from a distance. The white-haired boy realizes the attack isn't for him, but for his brother. Without hesitation, he activates the Eye of Chronostasis again to save his relative. The energy whip stops in mid-air, right in front of Tendo's terrified face. With that, Reiji moves at high speed and places himself in front of his brother to protect him. Time stops and Tendo falls backward, completely shocked by what just happened. The raider lands hard on the ground, ready to intercept any other attack. His red eye glows once more, confirming the ability is active. The knight attacks again, but the younger brother is ready to block with his sword. The energy whip hits the ground, creating a large explosion of dust and rocks. The white-haired boy manages to block the blow, but the impact of the explosion is very strong. He then taunts the monster, saying its real opponent is right there in front of it. Tendo watches the intense battle between his brother and the Black Knight in the middle of the hall. The red-haired boy stays on the ground, not understanding anything that's happening around him. He wonders what the heck has been happening all this time while he was down. The fight between the genius and the monster continues at high speed and with great intensity. Suddenly, the Black Knight stops in mid-air. surrounded by bright golden rings of light. The redhead is startled to see the enemy stop moving, as if it were frozen, that the creature remains completely motionless in the air, with its energy rings spinning around it. At that moment, the raider moves in to take advantage of the opening and attack the paralyzed monster. With a quick and precise strike, he lands a direct hit on the Black Knight with his light sword. Tendo wonders if that golden ring of light has something to do with all of this, but the rings shatter, and the knight starts moving again, attacking the white-haired boy. The redhead then realizes it's not the rings, but his brother's eye that's doing it. With his ability activated, the genius manages to land another powerful blow on the creature. The red-haired boy understands that it's Raiji's eye that is stopping the enemy. His brother is using that special power to fight on equal footing with the monster. But Tendo is confused and doesn't understand exactly how the eye's power works. Then, an interface shows that the knight also has a repair system for its injuries. At the same time, Reiji's life continues to drop and is now at 150 years. The counter doesn't stop decreasing, and Tendo is terrified to see it's already reached 155. The red-haired boy begins to understand the terrible truth about his younger brother's power. He wonders if that eye consumes his lifespan every time it's used. Meanwhile, the raider continues his relentless, non-stop attack on the Black Knight. With a direct hit, he finally manages to break the powerful enemy's helmet. The white-haired boy says he finally managed to crack the armor. But there's a problem. He realizes that with only one arm, he can't deliver a final blow to defeat the monster. With that, the creature seizes the chance to counterattack with its sharp wings. The Black Knight uses its tail like a whip and attacks the raider with all its might. The blow hits Reiji head-on, sending him flying with a huge impact in the hall. Seeing this, Tendo screams his younger brother's name in complete desperation. He realizes his brother is being overwhelmed and might not make it if this continues. With a heavy heart, the redhead grips the handle of his sword and says he has to help him, but then he doubts himself and wonders if he can really help. The boy feels useless and questions what someone like him could possibly do there. Suddenly, his younger brother yells at him, getting his attention in the middle of the battle. The raider asks how long he's going to stand there like a useless scarecrow. He yells for the redhead to get out of the way, because he's just getting in the way of the fight. Tendo lowers his head and agrees that his brother is right, and that he is just a blemish. He thinks that a genius like Reiji would never lose, because he is strong and different from him. The red-haired boy believes that the only thing a dead weight like him can do is to get out of there as fast as possible, so as not to bother his genius brother in battle. Suddenly, he looks to the side and sees something that leaves him completely shocked. He notices his brother's subordinate, Mizusaki, lying in the middle of the rebel. His raider vision focuses on the girl and shows she still has 39 years of life left. The blue-haired officer groans in pain, but is still conscious after the attack. Tendo is surprised and relieved to realize the girl is still alive. Then he turns his gaze back to his younger brother and begins to understand the situation. The red-haired boy realizes that Reiji was fighting to protect his subordinate and him. And even in that sorry state, he kept fighting so that no one would get hurt. But the white-haired raider yells at him not to stop and to keep moving forward. Tendo is paralyzed with guilt, thinking there is absolutely nothing he can do. He drops to his knees on the floor, completely frustrated with his own uselessness. Meanwhile, the battle rages on, and the genius stays focused on the Black Knight. The raider skillfully dodges another attack from the monster's energy whip. The dark creature doesn't give up and prepares another attack with its bizarre weapon, but Reiji manages to block the blow with his light sword in a swift motion. With that, the core in the Black Knight's chest cracks, even more from the impact. The younger brother and the monster stare at each other for a moment before the next move. The knight then unleashes a large amount of purple energy from its body, and several dark energy tentacles emerge to attack the raider all at once. The genius is caught by surprise and gets trapped by the enemy's powerful tentacles. He grits his teeth and tries to break free as the creature squeezes harder. The scene flashes back, and we see a young Tendo encouraging his brother to hit a beehive. But little 7-year-old Reiji was too scared and said he couldn't do it. With that, the other boys push him to the ground and call him a coward for not having the guts. Then, they start laughing and call him a crybaby until something hits them in the face. Little Tendo appears and asks if they have the nerve to touch his little brother. With a confident smile, the older brother gets ready to defend the younger one. The bullies are confused and smell something sweet as they wipe their faces. Tendo then reveals he threw honey on them and runs off to make his plan work. He hits the beehive with a branch, and the bullies are surrounded by a swarm of bees. To their terror, a giant bee appears, ready to attack the boys. The bullies scream in desperation and start running away from the furious swarm. They flee, yelling at Tendo for having caused all that trouble with the bees. Little Reiji looks at his older brother with a look of pure admiration and respect. Tendo then turns to him and promises he will protect him no matter what. The younger boy is speechless and just stares at his hero with shining eyes. And Reiji remembers that back then, his brother's back was dazzling to him. Back in the present, the raider continues to fight with all his might against the monster. Suddenly, the Black Knight's tail splits into several parts for a surprise attack, and with that, the white-haired boy is hit head on by a devastating blow. His eye glows intensely, and a magic circle forms, showcasing his ability. He then uses his power to stop the Black Knight's tentacles in mid-air. But even so, he is hit hard and thrown far away by the impact. The genius grumbles that he didn't want to rely on the eye of chronostasis, but has no other choice. The interface shows his life counter and warns that his right arm is healing. With that, his lifespan drops from 153 to 150, 2 years. He thinks a fatal blow would cost over 100 years of life to fully heal. The white-haired boy realizes the monster's core will break with one more attack, but he admits that landing this blow will be difficult because the creature is very fast. The raider defends himself from one of the tentacles, using his arm as a sort of shield. With a determined look, he prepares to continue the fight despite the disadvantage. The hero dodges another swift attack from the Black Knight with great agility. His red eye glows intensely as he analyzes the enemy's movements. Then he reveals he managed to freeze 6 of the tentacles using the Eye of Chronostasis. The genius concludes that this means there is only one tentacle left for him to worry about, and the Black Knight prepares to attack with the last tentacle it can still move. He knows the chance to win will only last for an instant, and he can't miss. With all the other tentacles frozen, he prepares for the final attack on the creature. The monster's core is completely exposed and on the verge of shattering completely. And with a battle cry, the white-haired boy charges forward to end the fight. A flashback of Tendo begins, and he laments how weak he was in the past. He remembers the day the labyrinth appeared, and he saw that monstrous shadow. The red-haired boy blames himself for letting his family perish on that terrible day, and he was the only one who got to continue living in peace after the whole tragedy. The boy feels pathetic for always being protected by others instead of fighting. Reiji then remembers that day and says that's why he became stronger. We see the young white-haired boy training tirelessly to overcome his weakness. He trained with his sword day and night, so he would never need help again. The boy sits exhausted on the ground, surrounded by several broken wooden targets. And all of this was so he would never need someone to protect him in a battle again. Back in the present, the raider faces his enemy with unwavering determination. The knight attacks with its last tentacle, but the genius was already expecting it, and the white-haired boy is hit squarely in the chest by the monster's attack. But he says that this time, he will be the one to protect someone important to him. Suddenly, a foot stomps hard on the ground, and someone emerges to help in the battle. The raider gives a small smile, seeing that his plan worked just as he expected. It turns out he used his power to freeze the last tentacle at the last second, and with the enemy completely paralyzed, he moves in for his finishing blow. The interface freezes on the Black Knight's core and notifies him about his arm's repair. Then a new message appears, confirming the arm repair is complete. With his arm healed, he grips the handle of his sword with all his strength. The white white-haired boy charges with everything. He's got to deliver the final blow to the creature. And with a cry of rage, he says the monster's life is now his. But suddenly, something hits him from behind, and he is completely shocked. One of the knight's tails pierces him, and he doesn't understand how it happened. He remembers that the monster had a tentacle hidden under the ground, and that was the only one that wasn't frozen by his special power. With that, the blow hits him head on and brutally throws him far away. The raider looks up with pain and surprise on his wounded face. The attack severely wounds him, and he loses a lot of his red liquid. With that, the white-haired boy is thrown and falls to the ground, powerless. He lies there, wounded and unable to get up to continue the fight, but even in that state, he doesn't give up, and his eyes still glows with power. The interface warns that the creature cannot move, but visibility is low. Completely wounded, he tries to focus, but the injury gets in the way. He realizes the red liquid is blocking his vision and his power. The interface confirms that chronostasis is unavailable and his arms have been injured. Even so, he drags himself across the floor and tries to grab his sword to fight. The genius doesn't surrender and tells himself he hasn't finished his mission yet. But the system warns that a high-temperature reaction has been detected in the enemy. The Black Knight prepares to fire an energy beam from its core. Lying on the ground, the raider just watches the scene, unable to do a thing. He laments, thinking he just wanted to become stronger to protect others. And he remembers the light he once saw on his older brother's back. With a tired look, he seems to accept his fate and the end of the battle. The hero remains on the ground, completely defeated and without any hope, but suddenly, his brother Tendo leaps into the air, ready to attack the monster. The white-haired boy is completely shocked to see his brother's action. With his sword in hand, the redhead prepares to strike the creature's core, and with a battle cry, he descends with all his might for the final blow. The image of his brave older brother from the past inspires the young man to fight. With a look full of fury, he refuses to be a coward again. Lying on the ground, the younger brother watches the scene, not believing what he's seeing. He thinks that if he runs away again, he'll never be able to move on. So he charges forward with his sword to attack the Black Knight with everything he's got. The redhead yells that if he fails now, he'll never be able to face the future. The creature remains frozen by the genius's power and is unable to defend itself. But the monster's core glows intensely and prepares to fire, and a powerful energy beam is fired toward the red-haired boy. Tendo is shocked to see the attack coming at him with no chance to dodge. Even with the beam coming his way, the boy doesn't give up and attacks with his sword. The knight's attack is so powerful that it creates a massive explosion of purple energy. The redhead realizes he can't dodge in time and braces for the worst. With wide eyes, he faces the attack that's about to hit him head on. But suddenly, Rigi throws himself in front of him to block the beam with his own body. Tendo watches in shock as his younger brother sacrifices himself to save him. He looks at his sword and realizes the blade shattered from the impact of the attack. In an instant, he understands the weapon would have broken if he had tried to block the beam. The Black Knight's attack throws both brothers far away with great force. The redhead falls to the ground and wonders what that was, as the monster can do anything. With a determined look, he prepares to continue the fight against the enemy. Suddenly, his left eye begins to glow with a very intense pink light. The knight prepares to fire another beam, and Tendo wonders if this is the end. He looks to the side and sees his brother falling from the sky, completely wounded. The redhead catches him in his arms, just in time to prevent him from getting hurt more. With tears in his eyes, he desperately screams his younger brother's name. He holds him tightly while the Black Knight just watches the scene from a distance. Tendo is speechless when he sees the massive wound on his brother's chest. The genius is severely injured, and it looks like he won't survive the attack. The redhead holds him tightly and asks if his younger brother can hear him. The interface shows that Reiji's lifespan is dropping from 57 years. The counter keeps decreasing, and Tendo screams for his brother not to pass on there. But with his last bit of strength, the white-haired boy says it's not over yet. He says he doesn't accept what his older brother has become in recent years, and he remembers when they were kids, and Tendo would drag him around, without a care in the world. But he laments that since that day, the redhead fell apart and went his own way. With a cry of rage, Reiji says he will never accept that version of his brother. Tendo is completely shocked to hear his younger brother's harsh words. He just stares at his relative, not knowing what to say or how to react to the situation. The genius then asks him to move forward and to keep on walking without stopping. The red-haired boy listens to his brother's words with a heavy heart. Reiji tells him to keep walking until the very last second of his life. With tears in his eyes, Tendo lowers his head and understands what he means. The white-haired boy remembers that in the old days, he only looked forward. The redhead's eyes fill with tears as he hears his brother's last words. Reiji says that no matter what happened, he would always laugh like a fool, and in the end, he always managed to snatch victory from anyone's hands. Tendo starts to cry as he remembers who he used to be in the past. Suddenly, his left eye begins to glow with an intense red light. He puts his hand to his face and wonders what this is, because his eye is burning. Then the system interface announces that the transfer of the Regulus weapon has begun. The red-haired boy can't believe what he's seeing and wonders what that powerful weapon is. With his last bit of strength, Reiji says that if it's for the power to win, he can have it. His red eye shines one last time as the power is transferred to his older brother. Tendo becomes desperate as he feels the power entering his body nonstop. The transfer bar keeps rising and has already reached 17%. With tears in his eyes, the redhead screams for his brother to stop this madness. But the genius says that no matter how much he regrets the past, the transfer continues and is now at 52%. The red-haired boy screams his younger brother's name, begging him to stop. Reiji says that no matter how unfair the world is, he cannot lose. The younger brother gives one last smile, and the redhead holds him tightly in his arms. And with his last words, he says that Tendo is his older brother and his hero. With that, the light in Reiji's eye fades, and he finally closes his eyes. The interface confirms the transfer is complete, and the power now belongs to Tendo. He stands up and faces the Black Knight with a look of pure rage and vengeance. The creature prepares to attack with its sharp claws and a golden aura. The monster fires another energy beam, but the redhead is ready to fight back. The creature stares at him with its purple eyes and a very confident expression, but the red-haired boy is not intimidated and prepares for the final battle. His brother's body begins to turn into sand and slowly disappear. Then the system reveals that Regulus weapon number 1 has the chronostasis code. Mizusaki wakes up and realizes she passed out during the fight against the Black Knight. She groans in pain and tries to get up to see what's happening in the hall. With a hand on her head, she realizes the battle isn't over yet and despairs. She gets up and is shocked by the scene she sees in the middle of the hall. The officer sees Captain Mogami's body dissolving and the knight still standing. She also sees the captain's older brother ready to fight the monster. The blue-haired girl is speechless and doesn't understand anything that has happened. She runs toward them and screams the captain's name with tears in her eyes. Completely shocked, she can't believe her captain has been defeated. But suddenly, Tendo's sword flies and stops, right in front of the Black Knight. The sword floats in the air, and the monster can no longer move. With the sword stuck in the ground, the knight is completely paralyzed. And to the girl's amazement, the monster's core begins to crack and break. Tendo remembers that whenever his brother attacked, he would make time start moving again, and that objects frozen in time don't break until time resumes. With this, the redhead concludes that no matter how strong the enemy is, it won't be invincible if it has a weak point that can be exploited. And with a cry of rage, Tendo attacks the Black Knight's core with all his strength. With his eye glowing red, the redhead yells that the monster's playtime is over. He then faces the creature up close and says its time has come to an end. And with the eye of chronostasis activated, he prepares for the final blow on the creature. The red-haired boy shoves what's left of his sword into the enemy's core. With this impact, the Black Knight's core shatters into 1,000 pieces. A blue energy explodes from within the monster, throwing it back with force. The explosion is so strong that the creature's armor begins to disintegrate, and the Black Knight is completely consumed by a pillar of light and energy. Meanwhile, the younger brother's body continues to dissolve into particles. In a few seconds, nothing is left of the genius but glowing dust. In the sky, what's left of the monster floats in the air before disappearing completely. Tendo looks up, shocked by the final result of the battle. He looks at his hand and feels the power he inherited from his younger brother. But suddenly, the boy lets out a cry of pain, feeling the power in his body. A new wave of energy throws him back with overwhelming force. The creature then stares down at him with a very threatening look. With that, an intense white light shines from the Black Knight's chest. The red-haired boy is caught by surprise and thrown by the monster's final explosion. He falls to his knees on the ground, completely exhausted and with no strength to fight. The explosion destroys everything around and kicks up a cloud of dust in the hall. The place falls silent, and only the sound of energy echoes through the area. Tendo looks ahead and realizes that it's finally, truly over. At that moment, his eye stops glowing and returns to its normal color. He then gets up and runs desperately, shouting his brother's name. With a face full of despair, the boy keeps shouting Raiji's name, but he knows his brother won't answer because he is gone forever. The hero stops and looks at the ground, where his relative dissolved into particles. He stands there, not knowing what to do or how to react to that sad scene. With a lost look, he can't believe his brother sacrificed himself for him. And overcome with grief, the red-haired boy falls to his knees and cries. With his face bathed in tears, he screams his younger brother's name non-stop. Kneeling on the ground, he sadly holds what's left of his broken sword. From a distance, the blue-haired officer watches the scene, not knowing what to do or say. Suddenly, a purple light flashes, and he has a terrible vision in his mind. He remembers the moment his brother was hit by the monster's attack. The image of his relative's severe wound leaves him completely terrified. With his eyes wide with horror, the boy screams his brother's name in despair. But then the redhead wakes up in his bed and realizes it was all a horrible nightmare. He looks around and sees he's in his room, which looks quite normal and tidy. Through the window, he sees the sunlight and the city buildings, like any other day. Out of breath, the boy tries to understand what happened, and if it was all just a dream. His eyes then focus on the clock, marking the time on the nightstand. Still confused, the boy goes to take a shower to try and get his thoughts in order. With the water running, he leans his hand on the wall and tries to calm down. With a tired look, he thinks that in the end, it was all just a bad dream. But suddenly, the system interface appears on his hand and startles him. The screen shows that his life expectancy is now 35 years. With that, he realizes it wasn't a dream and that the transfer was real. After his shower, he remembers a conversation he had with his younger brother. Raiji said he would be late that night because he had an important mission. Tendo then calls out to him and offers to pack a lunch for him to take. He hands him the bag, but his brother says he doesn't need to worry about it. The redhead insists, saying he packed all the things his relative liked the most. With a serious look, the genius ends up accepting his older brother's gift. He takes the bag and gets ready to leave on his last mission as a raider. Before leaving, the white-haired boy says he's leaving, and the redhead tells him to be careful. Back in the present, Tendo realizes that was the last time he saw his brother. With a heavy heart, he understands that his younger brother is truly gone. The boy spins around quickly with a look of pure panic and denial on his face. In disbelief, he runs toward the door, as if he could change what happened. Desperate, he runs down the hall of the house, shouting his younger brother's name. But when he opens the door, he comes face to face with Mizusaki, his relative's subordinate. The redhead is completely shocked and asks what she is doing there at his house. With a serious look, the blue-haired girl stares at him without saying a single word. He doesn't understand the situation at all and stands frozen at the door, not knowing how to react. Suddenly, the officer turns bright red and seems quite embarrassed by the scene. The scene changes, and we see the boy has prepared an omelette for her at the kitchen table. Still blushing, the girl tries to explain herself, but can't find the right words. She says she's going to eat, and the redhead finds the way she talks so fast amusing. With that, the subordinate picks up her spoon and tries a piece of the food he made. The red-haired boy watches her and notices the organization's emblem on her uniform. A flashback begins 8 hours earlier, right after they escape the labyrinth. Several soldiers surround Tendo on the ground and confirm the capture of the sole survivor, but the other raiders are shocked when they realize the redhead has the eye of chronostasis. One of the officers notices the emblem and wonders if he's connected to the organization. They then accuse the boy of taking Captain Mogami and yell for him to stop. At that moment, Mizusaki appears and reveals that he is the captain's older brother. But one of the soldiers doesn't care and brutally steps on the boy's head. Angrily, the officer yells, saying she won't allow them to treat him that way. A man says it's orders, but she takes full responsibility for the situation. Another raider asks about the captain, and the blue-haired girl gets very annoyed. With a pained expression, she remembers her superior's sacrifice in the battle. She then shows what's left of the uniform and says there is no captain anymore. The other soldiers fall completely silent, shocked by the terrible news. Even so, one of the raiders tries to restrain the red-haired boy on the ground by force. The officer tells them to take him home and that it's the most they can do for him. Back in the present, Mizusaki finishes her meal and thanks him for the food. She is surprised by his talent and asks if he always cooks at home. The redhead replies that his brother was busy, so he got used to the kitchen. The blue-haired girl listens to the explanation with a thoughtful and slightly sad look. On the kitchen table, a photo of the two smiling brothers shows how happy they were. The blue-haired girl closes her eyes for a moment, looking very sad about the situation. Then she introduces herself as Yui Mizusaki from the Labyrinth Operations Unit. The redhead hears the introduction and repeats the organization's name, not understanding a thing. With that, the officer asks if he has at least heard of that name before. She explains that it's a government agency that oversees the national raiders, and with a smile, the girl says they are the heroes who protect the people. The red-haired boy stares at her in silence, processing all the information, but he says that she herself doesn't believe those words about heroes. Mizusaki admits that his instincts are sharp despite his goofy appearance. The redhead replies that for a government organization, she has a lot of nerve. The subordinate says the place doesn't run on ideals alone, but there was one exception. With a serious look, she reveals that among them, there was a real, true hero, and that hero was Captain Mogami, the strongest and most exceptional raider in the country. The boy listens attentively as the officer says he will be the center of everything. She then looks at him and says his name is Mogami Tendo, and he is shocked. Confused, the boy asks why he would be the center of all this mess. The girl points to his left eye and reveals the secret behind the power, and says that the Eye of Chronostasis is not a common weapon like the others that exist. It is a Regulus weapon so powerful it could shake an entire nation on its own. She explains that he inherited that power from his brother in exchange for his life. The boy's red eye widens as he understands the truth about the sacrifice. He laughs nervously and says this must all be a big, bad joke. Then he remembers the scene of his brother's passing and blames himself for being alive. With anger and frustration, the redhead clenches his fists tightly on the table. The blue-haired officer watches his reaction in silence for a moment. Then she says she has one more very important thing to tell him, and reveals that the humanoid enemy from the labyrinth is likely still alive. Tendo is shocked and says he thought they had defeated the monster in there. But the officer explains that his life expectancy didn't increase after the fight. The system interface appears and confirms he still has 35 years. The boy looks at his own hand and realizes his brother's sacrifice was in vain. With a cry of rage, he slams his fist on the table and lowers his head in frustration. He curses the situation while the blue-haired girl just watches him in silence. With all this in mind, she asks if he wants to become a national raider. The red-haired boy is startled by the proposal and says it's a joke. Mizusaki explains that this way, he'll be able to enter the labyrinths to fight. The redhead remains silent, and his red eye shines with a new determination. The officer says that next time, he'll be able to avenge his younger brother. With his head down and teeth clenched, he seems to consider her offer, but he feels useless and says he's just the shadow of his genius brother. With clenched teeth, the boy shows a new determination in his eyes, and he remembers his brother's last words for him, to keep moving forward. His red eye shines intensely with the memory of that final moment. Rigi yelled at him not to stop, and to keep moving forward without giving up. The genius told him to keep walking until the very last second of his life. He understands that his relative entrusted that power and his dream to him, and with his last ounce of strength, the white-haired boy asked him to never lose. With that, the redhead gives a small smile and seems to have made his decision. He takes a deep breath and prepares to give his answer to the officer in front of him. The red-haired boy looks at the window and thoughtfully stares at the daylight. He then remembers that his younger brother saw him as his great hero. The genius always considered him his older brother and an inspiration to him. With teary eyes, Tendo decides he can't let his relative down. He then thinks that he can't betray his younger brother's feelings, and with determination, he says he will become a national raider to honor him. The redhead says he will do everything his brother would have done if he were still alive, and he promises to live in a way that his relative can be proud of him in the end. The blue-haired officer stares at him in silence and seems satisfied with his answer. With a small smile, she says that's fine, and that there is a first step. To the boy's surprise, she puts handcuffs on his wrists without any warning. With a mischievous smile, the girl says the first step is to arrest him. The redhead is completely speechless and says she must be kidding. The scene changes, and we see a black car driving at high speed on the road. Inside the vehicle are Tendo, the officer, and a man with glasses at the wheel. The red-haired boy says he won't run and asks them to take off the handcuffs. He shows his hands and begs them to release him, because it's very uncomfortable. The blue-haired girl looks at him with a serious, expressionless face. But she says it's a necessary procedure, and he needs to endure it. The redhead asks where they are taking him, and she reveals it's to HQ. She says he was already scheduled to be taken in for questioning. He then realizes he was tricked, and that it was all part of her plan. Annoyed, the boy says she had no right to refuse his answer. Suddenly, the driver chimes in and says he's mistaken. The man reveals that the rule is to take any bearer of a regulus weapon by force, and he says it would be normal to use full body restraints and secure transport. The driver explains that his treatment was only easy because of Mizuzaki, and says he's only getting special treatment because he's Captain Mogami's brother. But the officer tells the driver to stop, and says it was just more convenient. With that, the man with glasses apologizes for his rude behavior. The redhead and the officer remain silent for a moment inside the moving car, but the boy tells her not to worry because that's just how things are. Suddenly, an emergency alert sounds, and the driver announces a problem. The car radio confirms that an emergency situation has just occurred. With that, Tendo's eyes widen, not understanding what is happening. The alert warns that enemies have emerged from the fourth labyrinth at the Nerima base. Mizusaki comments on the terrible timing for this to happen right now. Then she orders the driver to head to the base, because there is no other choice. The car makes a sharp turn at high speed, and the red-haired boy screams in surprise. Because of the maneuver, he is thrown from side to side in the back seat. The blue-haired officer yells at him and tells him to put his seatbelt on properly. The boy asks what the heck is going on, and if that's the abandoned zone. She explains that after a while, the labyrinths start releasing monsters. The redhead then realizes that with them gone, only rookie raiders are left at the base. He complains about the security, and Mizusaki says they are short-staffed. With a determined look, they both know they need to hurry, or it will be too late. The scene shows a giant wall with a huge hole in the middle of the structure, and several insect-like monsters pour out of the hole non-stop. One of the creatures fires a yellow energy beam from its sharp head. Then, several monsters begin to attack the buildings and the surrounding city. Some investigators try to fight back with their firearms. One of them shouts that they won't last much longer and need reinforcements. But the monsters are too fast and easily defeat the soldiers. One of the creatures attacks an investigator and defeats him with a single blow. At that moment, the black car arrives at the battle scene at high speed. The red-haired boy looks out the window and sees the city's destruction. He then realizes that this is the Nerima evacuation zone he had heard about. The driver slams on the brakes and stops right in the middle of the destroyed street. With a firm step, the blue-haired officer gets out of the vehicle. She exits the car and stares at the scene of destruction with a very serious look. The base walls have been completely destroyed, and the situation is critical. With that, the girl grabs a pair of binoculars to get a better look at the situation from a distance. She sees the few remaining soldiers being surrounded by dozens of monsters. Worried, she realizes the enemies are going to escape the evacuation zone. The officer then turns to Tendo, who is still handcuffed inside the car. The boy asks if the situation is really as under control as it seems. She explains that the residents were evacuated 10 years ago, and there are no civilians, but the redhead says they need help and offers to fight alongside them. Mizusaki refuses his help, saying he is still a civilian and must go to a safe place, and she warns him that if he uses the Regulus weapon, the organization will punish him without a second thought. The red-haired boy is surprised and stares at the woman, not understanding the warning. She then explains that unlike last time, they are outside the labyrinth now. Therefore, the officer warns that they won't be able to cover up his use of the power. Suddenly, the girl grabs him by the shoulder with one hand and a weapon in the other. With a serious look, she asks if he hasn't forgotten about those rules, and reminds him that the Eye of Chronostasis is a high-risk weapon that burns his life. The redhead clenches his fists in anger as the agent continues to stare at him seriously. She then turns around and tells the driver she'll leave the rest to him. The man with glasses confirms, and the boy shouts for the blue-haired girl to wait. With that, the officer activates a type of glowing blue energy sword in her hand, and she runs at high speed toward the monsters to start the battle. She jumps very high and launches a powerful energy attack against the creatures. From inside the car, the hero watches the scene, shocked by the girl's strength. He then wonders what kind of absurd jumping power she just used. Her blue energy moves through the air like a whip toward the enemies. The driver brakes sharply, and the red-haired boy is thrown to the side. Angrily, the man shouts for him to know his place, because he's just an amateur. Even lying on the seat, the redhead glares at the driver with a defiant look. Then he falls silent and stares at the man with his two colored eyes. The hero thinks that he's not like Raiji, and that nobody knows the better than him. With a serious face, he continues to stare at the driver with determination. But even so, he seems to have made a decision about what to do. His red eye glows intensely, showing he's not going to stand by and do nothing. Suddenly, the boy sees a purple monster about to attack the blue-haired girl. An energy shield shatters, and the officer falls to the ground, completely shocked. With a hand to her mouth, the agent looks up with a look of pure terror. The humanoid creature stares at her up close, ready to deliver the final blow. At that moment, the redhead opens the car door and throws himself out of the vehicle. He rolls on the asphalt and manages to brace himself on the ground to avoid getting too hurt. The driver is furious and yells, asking what the heck he thinks he's doing. Lying on the ground, the hero gets up and prepares to run into the fight. The man yells for him to come back, because if he goes there, he will definitely be done for. But the boy ignores him and runs, wondering if he can really do this. His eye glows, and he says he's already made up his mind, and he won't lose